All right, the next chapter is called Jimmy. When Jimmy and I were in our bunk beds, we talked about everything. Most of the time, I knew what he was thinking, and he knew my thoughts too. One time, we led a bunch of kids through a part of Ailes Woods we never explored before. It was hot, and the rest of us wore shorts. But Jimmy always wore heavy jeans because he liked to climb through the thickets and briars and prickers. His face was sweaty and streaked with dirt. We'd just entered a sunny meadow, running full speed, when Jimmy suddenly slammed on the brakes. He pointed at a wooden shack caved in on one side. Come on, he yelled. Jimmy climbed in. I heard a muffled cry, and then he climbed out again. Everyone gasped. He was triumphantly holding two fistfuls of snakes. There must have been 6 of them in each hand, garter snakes twisting in the sunlight, furious that their sleeping place had been disturbed. Another time, after a bad windstorm, Jimmy and I went hiking through the swampy part of the woods. The storm had knocked over a tree, and a shallow pool had formed in the crater left by the mass of uplifted roots. We went in for a closer look, and as I moved to the water's edge, something lurked in the water. Did I see that? Jimmy asked. Yeah, I nodded. Looks like some kind of newt or salamander. That was no ordinary salamander, Jimmy informed me. Did you see the red on its gills? At home, Jimmy searched through the World Book Encyclopedia to find the animal that he had seen. For a long time, he sat on the living room floor, paging through volumes A, amphibians, L, lizards, and R, reptiles. Found it, he said, showing me the page. A mud puppy. That's it. We saw a mud puppy. Mud puppy? I fell in love with the odd name. The funny picture of it made in my head. The name clicked. Pretty soon, all the neighborhood kids were calling that uprooted tree Mud Puppy Place, although we never did see any mud puppies after that day in the woods. The next chapter is called School. It was time for me to start first grade. Jimmy stood with me at the bus stop. Mom waited for us. What are you going to do in school? Jimmy asked, frowning. I don't know, I said. Learn stuff. Why can't I come too? You're not old enough, I told him. Next year, Mom said. Jimmy kicked at some stones across the street. Finally, the bus rumbled up, huge and yellow, opened its doors. Jimmy stepped back as I climbed up the stairs. I found a seat next to my friend Steve Fishman and waved through the window. Mom waved and flashed a big smile, but my brother kept both hands at his sides. I liked school, and on the first day, I knew I'd be good at it. I could just tell. I was good at figuring out what the teacher wanted me to do and exactly how she wanted me to do it. Add, read, copy letters, though my handwriting was terrible. I even liked the hot dogs, wax beans, and fried potatoes they served for lunch. The day flew by. That afternoon, when I got off the bus, Jimmy was at the bus stop tapping his feet, eagerly waiting for me. Look, he had a small animal skull in his hands. What is it? I think it's a beaver, I said. Too big to be a cat, he said. Too big to be a cat. I found the bones in the woods. Here, it's for you. The next day, when I stepped off the bus, he gave me an old wasp nest. Every day, as soon as I got off the bus, he'd hand me a treasure he'd found in the woods. I knew Jimmy would be going to school soon, and I was worried about him. I tried to get him ready for it. It's not like home, I said. You've got to follow the rules or you'll get in trouble. What rules? Like, you can't just talk whenever you want, I explained. You have to raise your hand if you want to say something, okay? Okay. Eyes closed, he raised his hand and pointed straight up. This is serious, I told him. Do you know the Pledge of Allegiance? The what? He asked. I made him stand with me in the kitchen, put his hand on his heart, and pledge allegiance to the imaginary flag on the wall. Jimmy groaned and rolled his eyes. They say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, so you've got to know it. And you've got to know it by heart, I said, jabbing me lightly in the chest. I said, jabbing him lightly in the chest. Better learn it now. The following September, the big day came. Jimmy held my hand and giggled nervously when the bus arrived. We ran up the stairs together, and Jimmy sat on the edge of his seat all the way to school. When we got there, a woman met us and pinned a paper circle to his shirt. My brother shot me one last look before the lady led him away. That day, I spotted Jimmy only once, walking in line with the other kids, heading to the cafeteria. In the woods, he always knew exactly where he was, but standing in that noisy cafeteria with his freckles and thick glasses and cowlicky hair, Jimmy looked lost. When Jimmy got off the bus that afternoon, he went straight to the woods. I didn't see him again until supper time. That night, I asked Jimmy if he liked school. Boring. He didn't want to talk about it. And that's the way it was for him every day. He'd come home and go straight to the woods. He didn't even wait to change out of his school clothes or to eat a snack. School was fine for a kid like me because I knew how to shut up and listen. But it seemed wrong to take an outside kid like Jimmy and lock him inside for 6 hours a day. They should have a different kind of school for Jimmy. Maybe a place with acres of unexplored woods and streams and swamps and steep rocky cliffs where he could spend hours making forts or digging for fossils and animal bones. In November, we got report cards. I sneaked a peek at Jimmy's. His grades were lower than mine, a lot lower, which didn't make any sense. I knew that Jimmy was smarter than me. I knew that Jimmy was smarter than me, but there was no grade for knowing where snakes sleep in the heat of day, or for being able to tell the difference between the skull of a cat or of a beaver, a salamander or a mud puppy. It wasn't fair. But I told myself that the woods would always be the place where Jimmy learned the best. In that school, he would always be a straight A student. Okay, the next chapter is called First Pen, Age 8. Ooh, I forgot to show you the pictures. Here's picture of little Ralph and his father, Big Ralph. When I was 8, Dad bought me a pen. It was just a cheap Bic, the kind with a clear barrel so that you could see how much ink was left in the cartridge. Still, I loved it. In school, we wrote in pencil, so putting inked words onto a piece of paper really made me feel grown up. With that pen, a brand new notebook, I made my first story. I wrote it on a rainy Sunday, sitting at the kitchen table while Mom made caramel apples with the little kids. The story was about a Major League Baseball player who had batted a 1,000 during his rookie year. The player was amazing. He got a hit every time he came up to bat. No pitcher could figure out how to strike him out. It was fun writing that story. And it felt a lot like a small miracle, too. First, there was nothing on the page. Then the story appeared, written in ink that couldn't be erased. I sat for a long time, wondering what to write next. I stared at my Bic, the cartridge filled with blue so dark it was almost black. What words were hidden, unborn, unwritten, in all of that unused ink?